We remember the British Empire through images of power. The formidable Royal Navy, dominating the waves. Maps stained crimson, a testament to a dominion where the sun, famously, never set. It was an empire of gunboats, redcoats, and viceroys. But this is only the surface of the story. The true architecture of this global monolith wasn't forged in iron or steel, but in paper and gold. It was an empire built not merely by generals, but by bankers, not just on military conquest, but on a revolutionary and ruthless system of finance. This is the story of the dark money that fueled a global machine. To understand its rise, we must look back to a time before the glory, to the 17th century. England was not the master of the world. It was a peripheral European power, weakened by civil war and overshadowed by its continental rivals, Spain and the Dutch Republic. Its treasury was chronically empty, its military capacity limited by the crown's inability to raise funds. It was a kingdom struggling for survival, not dominance. But a profound transformation was about to occur, one that would pivot the nation's destiny away from the whims of monarchs and toward the cold, calculating logic of the market. The seeds of empire were not planted on battlefields, but in the coffee houses and counting rooms of London. The year is 1694. In a move born of desperation, a new institution is chartered, the Bank of England. It was not, as we might imagine today, a simple government entity. It was a private corporation, a syndicate of wealthy merchants and financiers who agreed to lend the government £1.2 million at 8% interest. In return, they received the right to issue banknotes paper money backed not by gold in a vault, but by the government's promise to repay its debt. This was the birth of the national debt as an engine of power. For the first time, the state could finance its ambitions on a scale previously unimaginable, funding wars not with immediate tax revenues, but with the borrowed wealth of its richest citizens. This innovation fused the interests of private capital with the ambitions of the state. War became an investment opportunity. When the government needed to fund a naval expansion or a foreign expedition, it issued bonds. These bonds were purchased by a growing class of investors, merchants, aristocrats, and early capitalists who, in turn, received a steady stream of interest payments, guaranteed by the state's expanding tax base. The British war machine was no longer just a royal project. It was a publicly traded enterprise. This system of debt-based war financing gave Britain a decisive advantage, allowing it to outspend its rivals and maintain a permanent, professional navy that could project power across the globe. Nowhere was this fusion of private profit and public power more evident or more potent than in the operations of the Honorable East India Company. Chartered in 1600, it began as a trading venture but evolved into something far more formidable, a corporate state. The company raised its own armies, administered vast territories, and waged wars, all in the pursuit of profit. It was the quintessential prototype of corporate imperialism. The dividends paid to its shareholders in London were directly tied to the territories it conquered and the resources it extracted in India. The British state, in turn, provided the naval protection and diplomatic muscle the company needed, outsourcing the messy, expensive business of colonization to a private enterprise. This financial ecosystem, however, was fed by far darker streams of revenue. The immense wealth that flooded into Britain during the 18th and 19th centuries, funding its industrial revolution and urban expansion, was inextricably linked to the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade. British ships transported millions of enslaved Africans to the Americas, a trade that generated staggering profits for merchants in Liverpool, Bristol, and London. This capital blood money, in the starkest terms, was then reinvested into British industries, landed estates, and, crucially, into the government bonds that financed the Royal Navy, the very instrument used to protect and expand the empire. As the empire pushed eastward, it found another lucrative, and equally corrupt, source of funding: opium. When Britain faced a severe trade deficit with China, which demanded silver for its tea and silks, the East India Company devised a sinister solution. It began cultivating opium on a massive scale in its Indian territories and smuggling it into China, deliberately addicting millions to fund its tea purchases. When the Chinese emperor attempted to halt this devastating trade, Britain responded with military force, launching the Opium Wars. It was a conflict where a nation went to war to defend its right to act as a drug cartel, transforming the profits from narcotics into official imperial policy. the financial extraction didn't end there. Across the empire, colonial taxation became a primary mechanism for funding British power. In India, the jewel in the crown, the system was perfected. Land taxes, salt taxes, and a host of other levies drained wealth from the Indian populace and funneled it toward British interests. This revenue didn't just pay for the colonial administration in Delhi, it paid for the British Army's campaigns in Afghanistan and Africa. Indian taxpayers were forced to subsidize the very military machine that held them in subjugation, a self-sustaining cycle of economic exploitation and imperial control. The wealth of the colonies was systematically siphoned to finance the industrial and military might of the metropole. This entire global enterprise was managed by a sophisticated financial system headquartered in the City of London. It was a world of government bonds which allowed investors to profit from imperial wars, and complex insurance markets epitomized by Lloyd's of London, which underwrote the risks of global trade and colonial ventures. At the heart of this network were powerful banking dynasties, like the Rothschilds, who financed governments, managed state debts, and moved vast sums of capital across borders, their influence transcending national allegiances. The British Empire was not merely a political or military project. It was a meticulously constructed financial ecosystem where colonial resources, slave profits, and drug money were recycled through London's markets to generate the capital that sustained its global dominance. For the ordinary Briton at home, the empire was a source of national pride and tangible benefit. They saw the patriotic fervor, the cheap sugar for their tea, and the inexpensive cotton for their textiles. They saw progress in civilization being spread across the globe. What they did not see, what was deliberately obscured, was the brutal exploitation, the systemic violence, and the financial chicanery that made it all possible. They saw the glory of the flag, not the blood on the balance sheets. The real power did not reside in Parliament or even in the Admiralty, but in the boardrooms of the city, in the hands of the bankers, merchants, and investors for whom empire was, above all, the ultimate business venture. But an empire built on debt and financial extraction carries the seeds of its own decline. The sheer cost of maintaining a global military presence and administering vast territories began to take its toll. Britain's reliance on its financial supremacy made it vulnerable. The two world wars acted as a cataclysm, exposing the deep cracks in the imperial edifice. The nation emerged victorious, but financially shattered, its industries exhausted, and its treasury deeply indebted, this time to a new rising power across the Atlantic. The torch of global financial dominance was passed. At the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, the U.S. dollar officially replaced the pound sterling as the world's reserve currency, signaling the end of an era. The formal empire may have crumbled, but its ghost lived on. The infrastructure of British global finance did not simply disappear, it transformed. The expertise in managing international capital flows, the legal frameworks, and the networks of trust were repurposed. Former colonial outposts like the Cayman Islands and Bermuda were reinvented as offshore tax havens, secretive jurisdictions that now serve as nodes in the modern global financial system. The legacy of empire became a system of offshore finance, allowing capital to flow beyond the reach of national regulators and tax authorities, a shadow economy born from the ashes of imperial ambition. Today, the dynamics of empire have changed, but the underlying principles remain eerily familiar. The new empires are not always defined by territorial conquest, but by financial control. They operate through sovereign debt, which can hold entire nations in a state of dependency. They wield power through currency systems and control over critical financial institutions. And the dark money continues to flow, moving through a labyrinth of offshore accounts and shell corporations, a system that perpetuates the flow of wealth from the many to a select few. The tools have evolved from gunboats to algorithms, from ledgers to blockchains, but the fundamental pattern endures. The story of the British Empire serves as a stark reminder that true power often resides not in what is seen, but in what is hidden within the financial ledgers. It forces us to look beyond the symbols of authority and examine the systems of capital that truly shape our world. The methods have become more sophisticated, the networks more diffuse, but the logic remains the same. It begs a question that echoes from the 17th century to the 21st. Who truly profits from the architecture of global power, and what unseen price is being paid?